Hi, I'm Heilbrunn, the editor of the National Interest. Today my guest is Dimitri K, the president of the Center for the National Interest and publisher of the National Interest magazine. Today we're going to discuss the case of Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Dimitri, why did Putin order him or pardon him yesterday or today?
Well, first of all, this is clearly the first time Mikhail Khodorkovsky has asked for pardon. In the past, on several occasions, Putin's office indicated that they would consider Khodorkovsky's application if Khodorkovsky would be prepared to oblige. It never happened before. Now Khodorkovsky is in Germany. He issued an official statement. He has confirmed that he asked for a pardon. He qualified this by saying that the pardon was not an admission of guilt, that guilt was never discussed, but he did ask for pardon. Then there is a story that Khodorkovsky also got an offer from the Kremlin he could not quite refuse. That is yet something we cannot confirm, but according to some sources, he was approached while he was in prison, in jail, and was told that Putin would be willing to pardon him, but also he needs to move quickly because there was a real possibility that they would have another trial against him, that they would give him another term, and so it was like, take it or leave it. That is not confirmed, but it could explain why Khodorkovsky for the first time would decide to cooperate with the Kremlin on the pardon. I need to add that Khodorkovsky has an elderly mother who apparently is really ill, and that could also be a consideration for Khodorkovsky.
When you think about the Khodorkovsky case, and I know you've met him in the past, what were your impressions of him when you met him before his prison sentence in 2003?
I met Khodorkovsky back in 1990s, where he already was a successful tycoon, but certainly not kind of the richest man in Russia, and the head of a most successful Russian oil company he became several years later. And he clearly was a man of substance, much more impressive intellectually than any other oligarch I had an opportunity to meet in Russia, and I met several of them. He also was a business executive, because a lot of these oligarchs, they knew how to make connections, how to make deals, corrupt deals, with senior government officials, how to enrich themselves in lawless 90s, but they did not know, and sometimes were not interested in running major companies. Khodorkovsky was different. Whatever you could say about the ways he acquired his property, he became a very serious, a very successful global business executive. As I was meeting Khodorkovsky throughout years, I also could see that he was increasingly self-confident, that in addition to business ambition, he increasingly acquired political ambition. And I would say that he even began to think about himself as a historical person, second to no one else in Russia, and a person who perhaps had an opportunity and the duty to challenge Putin's control of his country.
Did he make the mistake of underestimating Putin?
It's a very good question. Khodorkovsky, like many leaders, like most truly successful leaders, was a complex and contradictory person. Khodorkovsky had a brilliant mind, and intellectually he understood in 2002, 2003, when Putin was consolidating his power as president, Khodorkovsky understood that challenging Putin would not be the right thing for him personally, and certainly not the right thing for his business, because, let's face it, his business was acquired in the 1990s by means which were questionable and very vulnerable to government persecution. But at the same time, Khodorkovsky was looking at Putin, and it seems to me he was asking himself, who is this man? This nobody, this former KGB agent, this Lieutenant Colonel, this flunky in Mayor Sobchak for democratically elected mayor of St. Petersburg office. Somebody who was picked by Yeltsin primarily because he was considered a loyalist and who would do anything to protect his boss. And why and how this man would be allowed to establish an autocratic control over Russia. And Khodorkovsky had a very strong temptation to challenge Putin. Intellectually, he knew that this would be dangerous and probably counterproductive. But on an emotional level, it was very difficult for Khodorkovsky to control what I think was a combination of his ambition and his vision for his country, a vision of his country where Putin would play no role.
In thinking about the past 10 years, there's been something of a duel between the two men. Do you believe that Putin has emerged as a winner of this standoff, or is it 50-50?
I don't think that there are winners and losers in this battle, particularly because we do not know how this saga is going to end. Clearly, Khodorkovsky has spent 10 years in jail. He was released by Putin, not because Putin had to do it. It was Putin's calculated decision. Khodorkovsky's company was taken away from him. I'm sure that he still controls significant wealth, but not a kind of wealth which allowed him to be truly a major Russian and global economic and political player. But at the same time, I have to say that Khodorkovsky had vindicated himself while being in captivity. When I looked at his first case, I certainly did not think that Khodorkovsky had to go to jail. I liked him, I respected him, and I thought that this was at best a case of selective justice in Russia. But at the same time, I thought that as most tycoons, probably as all tycoons, he had done enough in terms of violating the law that the government could have, I wouldn't necessarily call it a legitimate case, but a case where there would be enough evidence to suggest that Khodorkovsky had done something wrong and indeed illegal. Then 7 years later there was a second trial, which was clearly a travesty of justice, which could not be taken seriously by any stretch of imagination. So Khodorkovsky increasingly emerged as a victim, not as somebody who was punished for his crimes, but really somebody who was arbitrarily selected for a cruel and unusual punishment. And Russian people, they normally identify with victims, particularly with heroic victims. And this is another element of Khodorkovsky's story. He was not broken in jail. He maintained his courage, his determination. He did not ask for pardon till right now. For 10 years, he really was defiant. What particularly impressed me about Khodorkovsky is that his defiance was measured by wisdom. It's very easy when you're in jail and you feel that you are being victimized, is to start screaming, yelling, making radical statements. On the contrary, Khodorkovsky acted as a statesman. And being so far away from Moscow and having limited source of information, he sounded remarkably serious with considerable insight and a sense of direction from Russia. I think he has a potential for being a major figure. Again, I do not know what is his health. I don't know what he wants to do with the rest of his life. But this is a man who is 50 years old, and he still may have a very impressive career ahead of him.
Dimitri, I think it's safe to say that the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal do not agree on very many things. But today, on both editorial pages, there were very skeptical editorials about the release of Khodorkovsky. The Journal and the Times both indicated that this was sort of an imperial edict reminiscent of, say, Imperial Russia. What is your analysis? The case has occupied a lot of attention in the West. Are people being appropriately skeptical, or are they misreading Putin when they chastise him for acting in a dictatorial fashion with a release and saying that Russia needs to move much further?
Well, I would rather criticize Putin for what was done to Khodorkovsky before. I especially would criticize Putin for Khodorkovsky's second trial, because the first trial was a kind of more in the gray zone, but the second trial clearly was a travesty of justice. And I think that to criticize Putin now for releasing Khodorkovsky, there is something disingenuous about it. Having said that, you need to put things into perspective. Putin essentially had a choice now. Khodorkovsky was supposed to be released in August next year. It's not far away. Putin had to decide what to do with him. One possibility, and clearly there were some people in security services in Russia who would welcome this possibility, would be to have yet another trial number 3, and to give Khodorkovsky another sentence. I have to say that if that was done, it would look completely grotesque. I cannot imagine anyone with good conscience who could justify that. And Putin would look personally vindictive and petty. Another possibility was to decide how to release Khodorkovsky. And he could be released when his term would expire in August, or he could be released by an act of presidential leniency several months earlier, and I'm sure it did not escape Putin's attention that he would be doing it just before Sochi Olympics in February, just after Putin got a lot of negative publicity because of Ukraine. And let me put it this way, it is not unprecedented, even for democratic leaders, when they establish a timing of their action, to think how it would be perceived at home and abroad. So I think that Putin probably made a political calculation, and he should not get a great deal of credit for that. But I see no reason to vilify him for this either.
Which brings me to the question about Putin himself. He's been extremely active on the world stage in the past months, and was called the Man of the Year in the Washington Post by Max Fisher. This is his latest bold move. Do you think there's some of the moves have been interpreted as being anti-Western in Western capitals such as the Ukraine. Others, he bailed Barack Obama out of a potential conflict in Syria, which was helpful to the Obama administration. Now he's removed an irritant between the West and Russia. Do you have any sense of where Putin is headed? Are we headed for a new détente, or are we just in some sort of more nebulous zone where Russia is attempting to define its interests but also not unduly provoke the West?
I had talked to President Putin about Obama actually in a small setting, and also in the presence of 300 people at the Valde Forum, where at Putin's invitation I was in the same panel with him. And when I suggested that Putin in a way helped President Obama by offering this deal on Syrian chemical weapons, after Obama clearly had no opportunity to attack Syria as he originally wanted, because of the vote in the British Parliament, and because of course what was happening with American public opinion and the shifting mood in the US Congress, Putin immediately interrupted me. And he said, no, I believe that President Obama on Syria made a courageous and principled decision. And that was not a question of my helping him or him helping me. He did what was right for America, and we respect that. Then there was a small dinner for the group. And, there was no particular question on this issue that Putin had to answer, but he came to this topic again. And then several months later, he was at the ASEAN meeting in Bali where Obama was not able to be present because of the government shutdown. And the Chinese were making clear that America is kind of deteriorating, that this is a question of American decline of the president not being able to attend this very important international gathering. And Putin said, no, I respect President Obama. If I was in the same situation, I also would not come. And he said, I have only regret, it is my birthday. I would like to invite him. My impression is that Putin is a strong and unabashed defender of Russian national interests, the way he interprets them. Obviously, he is a product of his circumstances, of his work in the KGB, of Russian tradition, of a general Russian disillusionment with the United States during the 90s when they expected much more substantive help from the United States and less interference in how they should run the democracy. So Putin clearly is not somebody who looks at the United States up with any special sense of admiration. He is not somebody who is interested in working lockstep with the United States or for that matter with the West in general. But he is prepared to work with Obama to the extent there are common interests. And he certainly, in my view, is interested in managing disagreements, and there are many. Looking at Putin in comparison with other world leaders, I think he should be recognized as the man of the year. Because if you look at major countries and major powers, who else is there? You look at, of course, President Obama, and I don't think anyone would seriously suggest that this year he should be recognized as the most successful global leader. A competing superpower, emerging superpower, China, they got a new leader who seems to be quite impressive, but he's very new. We're impressed with how quickly he's consolidating his power, and he said some important things, particularly about economic reform. And he made some bold moves, some quite provocative, like air defense zone, but we still don't know enough about him to call him a very impressive, successful leader. If you look at Europe, well, I would say you have a combination of pygmies, great disappointments in London, in Paris, pompous bureaucrats in Brussels, and you have one very impressive leader, somebody whom you know, of course, Chancellor Angela Merkel, who just was elected, became Chancellor a third time. I think a leader in a much different category than the leaders of Britain and France, a truly impressive person. But for a whole variety of reasons, partly because of circumstance, partly because of choice. Merkel is known primarily for her pragmatism. For bad things, she did not allow it to happen. She is not a bold leader in the Putin style. And Putin was there for a long time, for better, for worse, but he's a very experienced man. I don't want to say he has seen it all, but he has seen a lot. And I think that when he deals with international affairs, he kind of feels and acts like a real master. Putin's Achilles heel, in my view, is not that he is too provocative vis-à-vis the United States. His Achilles heel is that there is a disconnect between his ability to deal with foreign policy issues and his inability so far to do much about the Russian economy. The Russian economic growth, the GDP growth, according to latest estimates, is going to be just 1.4% in 2013. You cannot run an ambitious superpower if your economic growth is so low. And again, I will give Putin credit. He identified major problems with the Russian economy. He contradicted Prime Minister Medvedev, who likes to blame the economic slowdown on external circumstances, Putin said, of course, global economic crisis, recession, it played a role. But principal reasons are problems with the Russian domestic economy. And I think he quite correctly put his fingers on two major obstacles for Russian economic growth. One is pervasive corruption, and another is the power of the bureaucracy. Putin has removed the oligarchs from power and gave power by default to the bureaucrats. Problem is that Putin has identified the disease, but he did not offer any meaningful medicine. He talks the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk. And at this point, unless Putin will find a way to deal with domestic economic problems effectively, all his foreign policy ambitions would inevitably have to be curtailed or would result in foreign policy fiascos. He really has to make some very difficult domestic choices if he wants to be a successful global leader.
Well, Dimitri, thank you for this sweeping and fascinating analysis.
Thank you for the opportunity.